Hello.
Hello. Good to see you, Giotto.
So, what do we talk about today?
Well, why don't we talk about your definition of desire and what I feel about that, think about that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, you know my definition of desire, so I'm going to repeat it. But my idea is that,
Yeah.
let's say, the classical definition, let's say the superficial definition in Buddhism is that desire is bad, So, in some way,
Mm,
you should then
right.
desire, which I think is kind of dumb because then already you're desiring not to desire. Plus, if you don't
Sure.
desire to eat, to drink, to eat, to wake up in the morning, and let's say when you cross the street, you don't pay attention because you don't desire to live, then you die. So to me, it seems kind
Mm,
of stupid. And I think
hmm
instead, the desire is, for me at least, from my experience, where I can feel the more connected with the idea of desire, is the idea
mm,
that it's the wishing that something could have been different or something should have been different, which is of course
mm,
impossible because it's already in the past. And so it
right.
was like that. So I mean, if someone can of course watch the video or explain why it's impossible, it's related to the idea that free will,
Yeah.
basically free from what? Free from causality. That makes no sense. So from the Big Bang to now, that's it. So wishing that
hmm
something should have been different or could have been different is kind of maybe the only desire that really makes no sense, that is really absurd. And I
hmm
think it's the realization, because when they say don't desire, what does it mean? Like meditate for 3 hours and force yourself not to desire? I mean, this is not
Right.
enlightenment, this is just forcing yourself. Whereas if you
Right.
realize that things could not have been different, then how can you
Mm.
desire the impossible? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that basically responding pragmatically to physical needs doesn't come under under the category of reaction because, how else would we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to drink, we need to get across the road. Um, I think humans are also designed to be curious and to, wonder what's behind that mountain over there. Otherwise, I think earlier versions of humans haven't survived because they've stayed in the same cave system.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. But from a Fetter's methodology, which is, as you know, the one that I guide, it's usually more about suffering that we resist. We resisting how we actually feel. So that's not just about what
Can you
could have happened or
elaborate
should have happened.
what you mean about
Yeah,
resisting what you feel? So you feel something
yeah.
and then you do something. What is it exactly?
Okay, well, you're already familiar with this, but in case people don't know, in Buddhism, we call this second arrow suffering. It's as if something, maybe a physical pain or somebody doing something we don't want, creates a first start of unpleasant sensations. But we tend to add much more suffering on top of that original discomfort by trying to push away experience or pull towards us a different experience. And it's like a symptom of the illusion of desire and ill will, really. And yeah, that's how I would
So you
describe
mean
it. Does that make sense?
the judgment that something that happened is wrong. So whether it's
It's more,
no.
no, I think, well, I think that does come into it, yes, because I think that's the more fundamental illusion, really, which goes all the way to the end, which is that basically things shouldn't be how they are. They should be different to how we are. This is why I've sometimes thought that, from a fetter's point of view, you're talking about two things simultaneously, about desire in terms of the reactivity, but also desire in terms of like the um unrealistic wishes or unrealistic regret you were
Sorry,
talking
but what do
about
you mean
earlier.
by unrealistic? So is it impossible, as in obviously impossible, like that something that has happened should have been different? Or is it unrealistic, as in I wish I win the lottery, which is unlikely but possible? So what is
um
unrealistic?
Unrealistic is basically, well, the deeper tendencies are to want something that's unrealistic from life. We're wanting, we think that we can actually control our experience, and make it different to how it is. So however life is manifesting or has manifested, we think somehow that it shouldn't have been that way or it shouldn't be that way, and we should have a different version of it. That's a basically fundamental drive
But so where exactly do you put the difference between, for example, the wish that the past was different, which of course is an
Mhm,
impossibility, and instead
mhm.
wishing for a certain future which is not yet known. So potentially it could happen, that wish. So
Yeah.
what is the
Well, there's
difference?
nothing wrong with well, there's nothing wrong for wishing for something to happen in the future. I think you've talked about that well, if you that there's nothing wrong with wishes as such or preferences. They're what fuel discovery and exploration and all sorts of things. But it's when it becomes a story, about what should be, that's not you're adding a story on top of experience to augment what is actually happening or what actually happened. um so I think that's the difference. It's when
So
you
you mean
add.
the story as in that it's not a direct preference, but you desire because of a story you tell yourself?
Yes, that it should have been different to how it is, or it should be different to how it is.
But is it about the
Yeah.
motivation? Let's say, for example, so I wish I win the lottery, but in one case,
Right.
it's just a direct preference. I just wish I had more money, and that's it. It's money is
Hmm.
freedom, money is good. And in the other is
Yeah.
like, yeah, if only I was rich, everyone will respect me, and I will show to my
Right.
parents, my friends that I'm great. So that's what you're talking about, or is something else?
um well, that's going to motivation, isn't it, for
Yeah,
the
this is about
wishes, for why
motivation
you
side,
would.
yeah, of the issue.
Yeah. Well, I think the motivation is interesting in that it points to where else you might be caught, which might be back in, the identity illusion, that you have a self who is the agent of thinking and decisions and so on, and that you've got to defend that self and make it look good,
So just
and
sorry,
you might have
just a second. So
ideas.
by self, you mean the story you tell yourself about yourself. You mean the a story. Is that correct? An idea about who you are, what you are. Is that what you mean by self?
Well, from a fetish perspective, from a Buddhist perspective, it's an illusion that you have this separate self that has agency and has. I mean more that really, and I think if you have the illusion that there's a self here, then you also have the need or wish to defend that self or to make that self um, appear
Because
in a
for
good
me,
way.
in my experience and in my path, it feels like
Yeah.
that the identity is really about the story you tell yourself, which could be, for example, and I have this feeling
Mhm.
that they kind of all lead to the idea of I am special. So I am
Right.
smarter, I am more success, like I am a successful guy, I'm a smart guy. I
Right.
am, but it could even be I am more humble, I am more holy, I am more moral, So I
Yeah.
meditate
Yeah.
more hours than everyone else. So those guys are
Sure.
nobodies. They meditate less hours. So
Yeah.
and it's the feeling that then you feel like you have to defend those stories. So you have to put effort, which effort is a form of suffering, which is different
Mm.
than when you judge. So there is like first art and second art. So first art is the pain you break your leg. Second art is
Yeah.
why me? What did I do to deserve that? But I think there is another form of
Exactly.
suffering, which is effort. So effort is not
Mm.
necessarily a judgment, but it's like, let's say someone say I'm not brave, and I want to believe I'm
Mm.
brave. Maybe I'm going to enroll
Mm.
for the war, which I really don't want
Mm-hmm.
to, and I'm going to do a lot of effort, and maybe I will die just to validate
Right.
this idea of identity that I am brave. So is that what you mean? Because this
Okay.
is my experience about dropping identity. For me, dropping identity is about
Yeah.
realizing that those are just stories. And for me at
Sure.
least, the identity thing is I reduce it to a point of
Yeah.
view. So I say this story, which I told to you also, which is like, I don't completely accept the idea that there is no identity, but we may mean something else by identity. Because I say, if someone
Mm.
hit my feet with a hammer, I feel the pain.
Of
And
course.
if they hit someone else feet with a hammer, well, I may feel sorry for them, but it's not the same. So I feel more
Yeah.
pain. So there is some kind of identity. I mean, maybe
Sure.
it depends what you mean by identity. For me, I mean point of
Yeah.
view, like perspective over reality. And then anything
Right.
above that, I consider it a
Yeah.
story. So it's not that this
Right.
perspective is better, is smarter, is more brave, is more
No.
holy.
Mm-hmm.
Those are stories, and yeah, this perspective exists, and it's a perspective, and then there are
Mm-hmm.
stories, and those stories usually require effort to defend, which is a form of suffering. And also,
Yeah.
if for any reason you fail, so let's say you think you're smart and you try to defend this story, but then you do something stupid, you kind of lose your
Mm.
identity, so you also suffer because you lose your
Yeah.
identity. So is that your experience, or is different?
What I still suffer if I lose my identity,
No, because
or
for you, you
what do
say
you
there
mean?
is no separate
Anyway.
self. Or it's like you're approaching it.
Oh,
I mean, to me, it looks you're approaching it from a more abstract way. Whereas for me, I just
right.
say stories. Identity equals stories about identity.
Yeah.
Drop the stories, identity gone.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I get what you're saying about the point of view or the conventional, unmistakable feeling of aliveness. And if someone hits you with a hammer, yes, you would feel that, and it would go ouch. Whereas if it went somewhere else, it wouldn't go ouch. I like what you're saying about the effort involved in like keeping a story alive, because that was one of the things I noticed as I dropped, the various illusions, was that I realized, gosh, there was so much energy, not necessarily particular efforts, but so much energy going into maintaining those stories, those ideas, those, in effect, fantasies, of self and of the
It is
need
true.
to
The,
react.
the, the idea of
Mm.
self, you have to constantly
Yeah,
defend them. So it's almost like you add a surface of attack where anyone can trigger you and you have to fight back.
right. And there's a performative aspect to it too, like you say, like if you have this idea of a self to defend, then you might even do very stupid things to try and, augment that sense of self, or the
Yes, so
story
that's
that
the
you're
effort.
telling
So
yourself
you
about.
may go to
That's
war
the
to
effort.
prove. Basically, you have this feeling that you have to prove your story to others,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
requires effort. Plus, you may fail and then suffer kind of the loss of this fake
Yeah.
identity, but still, because you believe it's real,
Right.
it produces suffering. But what is your perspective about
Produces.
identity? So what do you mean when you say no separate self? Because is it the same as what I'm saying, or is different?
I think it is the same as what you're saying. You've just got a different way of describing it, really. I mean, I would call that what you call identity, or the certain perspective, the conventional self, if you like. There's a conventional aspect to reality where, my passport picture relates to this particular manifest, this body. It's, if you try going through passport control with my passport, you wouldn't have much luck, vice versa. um
Yeah,
it's
but is
like,
it just that? Because let's say that you buy a fake passport, or I mean, it's just an example, yeah. So let's say that you have a
right.
different passport, but
Hmm.
I mean, the point I'm saying is the passport you can change, but the fact that if someone hits you with a hammer on the foot, you and only you feel the pain, you cannot change it. And
Sure.
actually, it's kind of funny what I'm going to say. I mean, I think it's funny at least. It's like my definition of identity will be you are whoever is going to feel the pain if hit with a hammer. So this is the
Right.
definition. So it's
Yeah.
not the passport as in
Right.
conventional. It's like if someone
Okay.
hit this body with a hammer and you feel the pain, then it's you. And if
Yeah, yeah,
someone
yeah.
hits this
That would,
body and you don't feel the pain, it's not you. Is this
well,
what
that
you
would
mean
do.
by conventional, or is more than conventional?
No, I mean exactly that, really. You've just described it in a different way, but I can, yeah, concur with that. I agree with that.
I see. So
Yeah.
we kind of agree that identity is basically perspective on reality. I mean, whatever reality is, but let's say identity is a
uh
perspective.
yeah, you could call it that if you wanted to. I mean, but why insist on the identity at all, if you like? I mean, why is that a
Well, so
concern in a way, and
okay.
except functionally to get through life?
So
you know
I tell you why. I kind
Okay.
of insist. Well, first because I'm stubborn, but let's say I insist about the idea of identity because a lot of gurus
Mm,
they keep talking about non-identity, and to
mm,
me it feels like a story that they are trying to force on themselves and others. So
right.
because I still insist with my point is like there is a giotto that if you hit the foot with a hammer it feels the pain, and if you
For sure.
hit someone else's foot, I whatever I is doesn't feel the pain. So to
Right.
me
Yeah. But maybe
it
people do.
sorry go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I go. There's a pragmatic aspect which you're pointing at. I mean, it's true. I mean, even the Buddha apparently suffered physical pain and
Well,
the effects of old age.
of course
And
if he's
we
human,
have a
I mean if he's
we
human
have
he
a
has to
body.
suffer pain, yeah. So he may
We might
not
not.
find yeah, sorry.
No. Carry on. Carry
So,
on.
so
I
he
wasn't
may
really.
not feel suffering because he doesn't tell himself the stories of the second dart, but clearly he feels the pain. So the idea that
Yeah.
someone is going to live in a kind of eternal bliss, I mean,
Well,
I'm not saying
yes.
it's impossible. My only argument will be that if someone ends up having no desire, no fear, and living
Mm,
incredible bliss, they will only live
mm,
a few days and then die. And so this will not be the
right.
case of
Right.
Buddha, because Buddha, at least the
No.
story says, that I think he reached enlightenment around 30 something and he died around 80.
Something.
So he lived 50
Right.
years. So, I mean, if he
Mm,
was in this constant state of incredible, whatever, incredible joy and blah, 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 he would probably have
mm,
forgot to eat and died. You understand?
exactly.
It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense that if you are feeling this feeling of incredible ecstasy all the time, you will
Mm.
not eat, you will not drink, you will not take care of
No.
yourself, you will die.
No, for sure. There is, like I said, a pragmatic aspect of needing to look after the body. Yeah, and there is also the adrenalized, I suppose, survival system going on. That if something gets near you and it's a danger, you would jump out of the way. You'd still jump out of the way. You wouldn't just allow the truck to run you over. You wouldn't just um, step in front of a tiger on purpose. You know what I mean? You wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, so on
Um,
purpose will imply some desire, but the example I like to make is this example which
mm,
is say, because people say maybe they don't desire to live or they don't care about pain. But if that was true,
right.
they will cross the street without looking
Mm,
if the light is red or green and just say, whatever happens, happens. And within a few
sure.
days, they will cross when it's red and die. But we don't
Yeah.
hear of that many gurus that die in a car accident. So then they desire to live. There is no other explanation.
Of course. No, there is an animal sort of instinct, isn't there, to want to survive and to keep this body alive until it's untenable. I do remember someone on some, you get these people talking on Facebook about, what it means to be enlightened or to be without reactivity or whatever. And someone was saying, well, you could prove it to me if you were to, go walk on burning coals and, not feel pain. And it was completely
So this
beside the
is
point.
funny.
But I
Okay,
think a lot of
let
people,
me just say something. So I actually
yeah,
did this thing of walk on the burning coal when I was
yeah,
much younger. It's kind of a scam. I mean,
right.
it's not really a scam because you really do it.
Uh,
But the way it works, there is a trick. So basically, the trick is first of all, I think for some reason the coal, it's that when you see the coal, the inside is bright, but you see kind of an outside
yeah,
that is like more dark, because I don't know, maybe
yeah.
the way I think the way the heat dissipates on the wood is kind of different. So let's say if you were to walk on burning metal, it will
Mm,
burn your feet. So what
right.
happens, the trick is this, basically what they tell you is they say, I mean, of course they add some bullshit like you should not hesitate, blah 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 blah, but in reality they tell you you walk and you don't stop. And basically if you walk fast enough, it's not going to burn you, just
Right.
because I think of some chemical property of the wood that it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
transmit the heat so effectively, let's say, as metal. And so as long as you walk fast and you touch it maybe for 0.1 second, of course, if you stop walking, it will burn you. But if you do
Yeah,
tack, 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 then it will not burn you. But it has nothing to do with your mental state. Of course, if you get
yeah,
scared and you stop walking, it will burn you. But your
it
mental
would
state
burn
is
you.
completely irrelevant. So as long as you walk and you don't stop, you basically it's like you have to walk quick, like step, 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 step. Nothing happens. If you walk slowly or you stop, it will burn you. And if it was something else but wood, like metal, it will definitely burn you. So this is kind of a scam.
That's the thing.
So it has
But
nothing to do with
it was
enlightenment.
giving various examples, like put your hand in a canister of boiled water or boiling water, and tell me you don't feel pain, which is completely. I said, well, one, I'm not going to do that. Two, is besides the point. Of course, it
But
would be
I think it's
painful,
also
and actually,
interesting. Wait. I think it's also
yeah,
interesting that
yeah,
someone will feel the need to put his
mm,
hand in boiling water just to prove to someone else that they have reached
yeah,
enlightenment, which will indicate that they have a
right,
story of identity that they have to defend and that they are enlightened. And you can basically challenge them to whatever you want. You can say, well, if you're enlightened, then you can do this, you can, and now they have to do it to prove it to you. And so most likely
right,
they are full of stories and they are far from being enlightened. They're
yeah,
just fools.
yeah, quite possibly, yeah. Anyway, suffice to say, I didn't follow up on any of the suggestions to prove prove
Yeah.
anything, and
I think if someone
but
feel they have to prove something, it means they fell into the trap of an identity story. Because
right,
why would you care about proving to others something? I mean, you should be, I think, interested in allowing others to probe you in the sense of
mm,
challenging you. And you should be happy to
mm,
be challenged because you may realize that you were missing something. But it's the other
yeah,
way around. So
oh, for
others
sure,
should challenge you, and you should be happy to be challenged because the challenge may be true. Maybe you are not enlightened or not yet. You
for
still
sure.
have some stories you have not uncovered, and someone can help you to point out to a story you have not yet
Mm,
uncovered, and they are doing you a favor.
so
They are helping you. The person
yeah,
who is probing you and kind of attacking you or criticizing you is actually doing you a favor, is giving you a chance to see, do you still have this story? But it's for you to receive and to wonder if you still have this story or not. And it's not the other way around that
yeah,
you have to now defend your assumption that you're enlightened at all costs and prove him wrong.
right, yeah. No. It's true. It's that's why it can be useful to be guided sometimes, because that's your job in a way, to challenge people to challenge themselves. To find their own hidden assumptions or stories, as you would put it, and yeah, see whether they can. Whether they are there, and then if so, whether they're really true.
Yeah, it's not
So
always
I think,
easy to identify. I mean, the most obvious stories are easy, but some stories are not
yeah,
always easy to identify. But I think it's interesting that enlightenment has all these, like, fanfare, I'm not sure if that's the right word, all this
yeah,
hype
fanfare,
about being
yeah,
some kind of magical thing, like glittering and shiny, and even the idea of light from enlightenment. But really,
oh
it's
yeah,
just about realizing that your mind is conditioned by some stories that make no sense and that are not supported by anything.
yeah,
Because it
absolutely.
seemed like
Um,
a small thing. It's just about getting rid of stories, but actually the implications are huge of getting rid of those stories. It's like going from believing to
yes,
Santa Claus to non-believing, but multiplied by 1,000, because there are way
yeah,
more stories and they are way more powerful. But I think people
it's
don't
an
understand
interesting
that,
point.
sorry,
No,
that enlightenment is really just
yeah, no.
this, is stories,
Yeah.
getting rid of stories.
Well, on one level, yes, that's all it is. I think but it's not necessarily always on a conceptual level. Sometimes you do have to actually feel that kind of. Oh, my experience is really different to what I assumed it was, and it can be, that's what makes it life changing. Because if you just changed your ideas about things, and you believed something different instead of, you might have a more useful belief, um, than or like what you could say, a functional belief, rather than a dysfunctional belief that's in something that's completely unrealistic. But I think it's normally about seeing something that you assume is in here that isn't there. That's well, from the Fetter's perspective, that's what it is. But I think the problem is, like you say, Enlightenment has a lot of fanfare and hoo-ha about it, and people do assume it's some special state, or that people who wake up are going to be somehow special and have a halo around their head, perhaps, or the Christian ideas or whatever, religious ideas about purity and being, always happy and always, or pain free. And I think some of those ideas can actually stand in the way of the fact that you see through the illusions, because you can actually, like you say, it can be quite ordinary and quite to take away a false belief. And yes, it has a profound effect, but it's you're still in ordinary life with an ordinary state of mind. You're not suddenly,
I think I've always found
elevated.
this idea of purity kind of funny, because it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, purity of what? Because something I found interesting, I don't know if I told you this one, but it's something I've noticed, that a lot of those gurus, they use words like, for example, purity, but let's say, for example, in free will, So every time I heard those words, which they're kind of generic, ambiguous, I always add of what? So purity of what? Or free will, as in, but free from what? Because if you say free from causality, then it's already absurd that you can already give up. It's like, doesn't make sense. So I think when you go more into the specific, it's already a good starting point to realize that those are just stories. Like, purity of what? What does that even mean? It's not that it's like water that you want to extract, let's say only the H2O, and you want to remove the salt or some other stuff. Like purity of what? Of your mind?
It's implying an opposite, isn't it? Of sulliedness, of being impure.
Of impure, yeah.
Of being,
but what is impure?
Which is, well, what indeed, I think that people, can easily translate their, and often do translate their sort of maybe Christian conditioning, or I don't want to assume everyone's come from that set of beliefs, but, whatever religious beliefs you grew up with, but, you can tend to project onto Buddhism as well. And
I think it's funny.
I think there's
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of talk of purity, and say, I mean, I grew up in the Catholic Church, for example. I think you might have as well in Italy.
Yeah, but I mean, my parents were not like strong believers. They were more secular.
Right. So they didn't make you go to Sunday school or go to a religious
I went a few times
like
with the Boy Scouts to the church, and it was super boring.
Well, there's a lot of ideas of purity and so on in Christianity, which I think people can more or less, without questioning it really. It's just taking the word and the assumptions about what that means, and then placing it on, even if they're not followers of that church or that set of beliefs anymore, they're still influenced by those kind of ideas.
But I think
they're not useful.
I think in Christianity I can understand, because you have the idea of sin. So God is pure, and we are as human are impure because of sin. But what I think, and so I can understand their logic. It's at least that one is coherent. There are other things that I think are incoherent, but this one is coherent. But the more, let me just drink some water. The gurus, the one that, especially the one that they believe in the all, which I'm not sure, because what is the word, like some called Atman or Brahma or whatever, this idea of this unique soul or whatever, so which is kind of the all, the everything. So they say, yeah, you don't really have a separate identity, you are just the all, so this everything. But then this everything contains everything by definition, so it contains pure and impure. So it seems very contradictory, because on one end you're saying that it's the all, that the all is like perfect, it's great, it's everything, and we are part of it, or we are it, and we just don't realize it. But then there are those discussions of purity, but how purity can apply to everything, because everything will contain pure stuff, and in pure stuff, whatever that means. So it's so contradictory. I have a hard time
Yeah.
relating to it or
Yeah.
understanding it.
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, those ideas, I mean, they're all concepts, aren't they? You know, emptiness, fullness. Yeah. I think that I think we've discussed this before about, you know, how to, you know, to avoid seeing that there is no essential soul, you know, you can expand the sense of I am to include everything. And it's a kind of way of expanding the I, expanding the illusion of I am, of your existence by, you know, simply, it's a bit like you said, I think, blowing up a balloon in an empty room. So you get so you have this feeling of non-separation in the end with maybe the walls of the room, but it's like
Yeah, but
you've actually filled.
so yeah, I was listening to some video like that from some gurus, and basically they say this. Yeah, they say you have to expand your eyes, so as if the idea that we think we are
Yeah,
only us is kind of reductive, and so they propose this
sure.
idea of expansion of the eye, as if we should
Yeah.
as if there is such a thing as a consciousness, whatever that means, that yeah, like a balloon has to expand. But then, do you know anyone that has expanded their consciousness, and that if someone hits someone else's foot, they feel the pain? Because that, I mean, if you have the
No,
consciousness of the all, it means that
right.
any single person in the world that get hit with a
Mm.
hammer on the feet, you feel the pain. Does that exist? I
I
mean,
like
did
it.
Buddha, because poor Buddha, I mean, so we know that Buddha feels pain because there is a
Yeah,
sutta, it's called, I think, where he stepped on a piece of wood and he hurt his foot. But then
sure.
I'm sure in those time people where there were wars and people were dying and they were sick. But it doesn't say that
Yeah,
he was feeling all that pain of every single individual in the world. So then he had not
no.
expanded his consciousness to cover the whole world or the all.
Mm.
So
Mm.
this doesn't
Yeah,
even make sense with Buddhism.
no.
It's just
No,
nonsense.
no, I mean, it is not. Well, it's not nonsense in that you can temporarily, if you're not in pain and someone isn't sticking a, you know, hammering your foot, you know, you can temporarily expand. You can go into particular, you know, all sorts of meditative states where you expand your supposed consciousness, and you know, you can feel in contact with. You can feel in a very nice state.
Yeah, but I think here maybe you are
You know,
cherry picking the
or
conditions. So you're saying,
oh yeah,
because, well, yeah, because if you really have expanded your consciousness, it's not that
mm.
you only feel the good and not the bad. So if someone break their leg on the other side of the world, you should feel it.
No, no, no,
No.
no. I don't mean that. I
uh,
don't mean that kind of expansion of consciousness because I don't believe that exists. I don't
mm.
think that happens.
But
I
then the
just
one
mean
you're
that, you
referring
know,
to, sorry.
no, just temporary states, you know, which people can temporary states of expansion where you feel, you know, you feel a particular way, or you feel nothing. You know, you can actually go into almost nothing states through meditation as well, where you know, you might not even experience your body. But I still think if someone hammered your foot, you'd probably come back to a more
To reality.
particular awareness. Yeah.
But how do you know it's real? Because, for example, I can get high and I can feel I'm
Mm-hmm.
flying, but I'm not flying.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you can induce a feeling of unity, but how do you know it's truly your consciousness that is expanding? Maybe you're just, it's a high that is not induced through drugs, but is induced through some
Yeah.
strange mental activity, which is meditation.
Sure. Well, either through drugs or through meditation. Yeah, the idea of a consciousness expanding is probably what you'd say about it afterwards. It's a conceptualization of it, isn't it?
So you're kind of
You know, it's not your
describing
actual.
what it feels like. So we can
Yeah.
say the truth is you feel a certain feeling, and then you describe it by saying it feels as if, but I will stress as if,
Yes.
it feels as if my consciousness expands. But this is like, I get high by smoking weed, let's say, and then I
Sure.
say I feel like I'm flying, or actually I should say I feel as if I'm flying, but obviously I'm not.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm not flying. So maybe
Yeah.
you're not expanding anything. I mean, how do we know? Maybe you're just inducing a state through doing something to your brain with the breathing and the posture, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no experience with meditation.
Yeah.
And it end up having
Oh,
altering your
yeah.
consciousness in a similar way to drugs, I guess.
Yeah. Well, this is it. I think a lot of religions also stress, and developing particular mental states as if that's but they can become misleading because people can feel they are developing a self. They're like refining their self, and they're still clinging onto the self. And the path that I took was a bit like that. It was almost like had these ideas like the evolution of man, like you could get in more and more rarefied into a more and more rarefied state, which would be somehow permanent, and yet you were an impermanent self who could. I mean, it's complex, but long story short, in the end, I could go on retreats and in ideal conditions, like whether nobody's hammering my foot or I'm not having to pay bills or look after, my son or whatever. I could get into very lovely mental states and stay in them sometimes 24/7 for, I don't know, 2, 3 weeks longer, even. But then what would happen is I'd come back to my flat in Hackney in London, and within 24 hours, I was back in a state of, of suffering, really, or of,
So it doesn't
mental.
persist, it doesn't last. This
No, it doesn't last. No, you can develop an ability to go into these lovely mental states, which are, they they're good. I think they can serve a purpose in that they can help people loosen. I suppose they can loosen the mind a little bit, or calm. You can calm yourself and loosen up your ideas about who you are or what you are a little bit through meditation. But I don't think meditation in itself will lead you all the way to waking up. I
but do you
think you have
think,
to.
isn't there the opposite risk that you end up identifying yourself with this new state and you say, this is the real me? So it's like, let's say I get
Yeah.
high and then I say,
Yeah.
oh, but the state of being high is the real me and being sober
Right.
is not me. So you just chase
Yeah.
this high and you now tell yourself a story about identity that you're the real you is when you're high, whether it's through
Right.
drugs or meditation, but it's just a story and you're
Yeah.
just inducing a state, which now the state may be lovely as you describe. I don't know, I've never
Yeah.
experienced it. Um, but so what? I mean, you found a way to experience a nice state. Why this should have
Yeah.
any other meaning or other implication? It's just you found a way to experience a nice,
Mm.
pleasant state.
Right. Drug free.
Drug free,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah. So it's well, I think because there are religious ideas that you kind of somehow, you're refining your consciousness. Is that they're still predicated on this illusion of a self that can be refined and can be transformed, if you like. So if you're on any kind of path which is about transforming self, for example, you go back to the desire theme. It might be quite good to learn how to manage or calm your anger or whatever it is, or whatever gets in the way of you, living your life in a more effective way. But it's always going to be like a temporary management problem, unless you address the underlying
Because it's
illusion.
not the root cause. I mean, the root cause is the
Yeah.
belief in the story that doesn't make sense, which kind of triggers something. Let's say maybe the feeling that it's unfair or it should have been
Yeah.
different or could have been different. And that's the root cause. So if you have to manage the
Yeah.
anger, let's say through meditation, then clearly you have not
Hmm.
fixed the root cause.
Exactly. Well put. Yeah. I mean, how did you find it, letting go of that illusion of agency, or maybe even the deeper one of, that there is nowhere to stand? And
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
that
I'd,
was
I'd
my
be interested to hear
final.
more.
So
Yeah.
basically, let me remember. So the agency, I mean, it's a long path, but I think because I had this idea that when you take a complex decision, you're actually deciding. So something is actually happening, and so there has to be a you, let's say, that is deciding. And I was making the example of a complex decision, like, for example, let's say you have cancer and you have to choose
Yeah.
between doing a surgery which can cure it and it's 50-50, you die immediately or you are good, or you die within a few years if you don't do the, let's say after 5 years, if you don't do the surgery. Now, this is a deep and complex decision. It's a one-off
Sure.
decision. It's a big decision. So you may spend
Yeah.
days thinking about it, and you call that deciding, as if you feel that
Yeah.
some choice is really being made. And I remember I told you at the time that then I realized that it's just a very long chain of thoughts. So every
Mm.
thought generates the next thought. It's a long chain of thoughts. So of
Yeah.
course, because
So,
if you ask me, would you rather make $1 million or lose $1 million? I say there is no hesitation. It's just one thought. It's better. It's better to make a
yeah.
million than lose it. But when it's
Yeah.
about choosing versus you have 50% chance to cure the cancer, or 50% you
Yeah.
die immediately on the operating table, versus you live 5 years but then guaranteed to die in 5 years, you have to produce many thoughts. And so every thought generates the next thought, the
Mm.
next thought, the next thought, the next thought. And it can take
Mm-hmm.
maybe months to process this incredibly long chain of thoughts. And every
Yeah.
thought generates the next. And eventually, the final thought is your conclusion. But in some way, every thought caused the previous. And so what I did later on, I kind of spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I realized that the word this to decide is kind of confusing because it implies agency. But if you
Yes. A
replace it,
decider.
yeah, a decider. But if you replace it with the word hesitation,
Mm.
it's clearer because there is no hesitator. It doesn't, I mean, you need less a hesitator compared to how much you need a decider. So you can just say, well, my brain is hesitating. I mean, that's what brains do. When the decision
Yeah.
is complex, the brain hesitates. And when the decision is
Yeah.
simple, the brain goes ahead quickly. But that doesn't imply that, because also, so this is the positive explanation in the sense that it seems to make sense. This idea of the chain of
Mm.
thoughts, and that to replace the word decide with hesitate seems to make a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah.
and so this is the positive side. And the negative side,
Yeah.
which I developed later, is the idea that to justify free will, you have to ask the question, free from what? And that will be free from causality, free from the laws of
Mm.
physics. So that will kind of assume that there is in your head a little part of your brain
Yeah.
that is completely independent and immune from causality and the laws
Yeah.
of physics. Now, that makes absolutely no sense. So everything that we know in the universe follows causality and the laws of physics, except
Yeah.
a small part in your brain. Why would that be the
With
case?
with the fact that I love your way of coming to it, which is, I think you saw that train of thought thing and how it's just a longer one, and it involves some hesitation because it's got it's a significant choice in that case whether to have an operation or not have an operation. But I think when I'm doing this, but when I'm looking at this particular illusion with people, it simply is not looking for like whether there's anything exempt from causality. It's just looking for whether there's any self doing the deciding. And people can never find this supposed agent, who sits there, little man in the box, who's, weighing one thing and weighing another thing. And they can often even not find that moment of decision, even though, yes, it does happen. There is a concluding thought. Yes, I'll have the operation, or no, I won't have the operation, maybe, or I'll go down this road instead of going down that road. But it's people can never find the self that they suppose is behind it. You're taking it to the whole extreme of, which is great, of, well, is it free from causality? I would just ask if it's caused by a self,
Yeah, so
done
for
by a
me,
self.
that strategy didn't
Yeah.
really work because saying
No.
where is the agent, you cannot find it, is not enough
Yeah.
to say it doesn't exist. It's like if you say where is Pluto,
Right.
you cannot see it. I say,
Yeah.
well, yeah, but it's there. So I have to
Right.
kind of prove, not prove, but let's say make it obvious that it really makes no sense to believe that there is
Right.
a part in your brain that is immune from the laws of physics just to justify this agency. So this agency will contradict with everything that we know, everything that makes sense. And so plus you can also explain the phenomena without. So it's like not only you can explain the phenomena without the agency with the chain of thoughts, but the explanation of the agency is completely absurd and incoherent.
Right.
So you kind
Yeah.
of reach the conclusion that most likely, I mean, I'm not saying that it's not there, because maybe there is an agency, who knows, it's not that we know everything, but there is no reason to believe it as of
Yeah.
now. And
It's more
plus we
like
can
that.
explain everything without. So if you can explain everything without, plus there is no reason to believe something, why would you believe it? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, most people do need to, they do assume that there's this little man somewhere, it's that's how it feels, I think that's the reason that a lot of people do get it through looking for a self. I know it didn't work for you, and it was a different route slightly, which is interesting because there must be other people who would get it more like you did. But yeah, most of the people that I guide would they would look for something they assume was there, like the thinker of thoughts, which is, it might seem even obvious. Of course, there's a thinker of thoughts. That's me.
Yeah, but the thing
Okay,
is,
so where's
this
the thinker?
agent,
Where's the
this
me?
this little man in the box, will then have to be immune from causality and the laws of physics, or
He
it doesn't
would. He
work.
would. Yeah.
So I think this is kind of the
Right.
weird thing. It's like, I mean, anything that happens, except let's say the original cause, the Big Bang, has to be
Yeah.
caused by something else. Because free basically means free from causality and from the laws of physics. So this idea of free doesn't make sense.
But will also implies an individuality behind it, doesn't it?
Maybe, but I didn't, it's like, let's say in mathematics. So it's like when you have, let's say, two variables and you multiply them, you only need to know that one of the two is zero to know that the total is zero. So it's like 5 multiplied by 0 is 0. So if I have x multiplied by 0, I don't need to worry about how much is x. I know that the result is 0. So I didn't really investigate the will part, because I was satisfied with the part that the free part doesn't make any sense. So whatever comes next cannot make sense. So I never really investigated the will part of free will, just the free part.
Well, yeah, different routes, different courses for different horses, as they say. Yeah, you've had an unusual pathway, but yeah, I don't know if you want to say more on that, but yeah. What effect did it have on your everyday life? Did you notice an effect when that clicked for you about nothing is free from causality? And
I think it removes feelings like regret, because there is nothing to regret. Because let me just drink. Sorry.
Sure, I'll do the same.
I mean, there is nothing to basically, you can only regret if you believe that something could have went different, and that will require free will. So it's not that you have to condition yourself through, like, let's say, nonsense like positive thinking, which maybe for certain people is kind of a band-aid, let's say, positive thinking. But
yeah,
I'm not completely against. But let's say if you realize that things could not have been different, how can you regret anything? It's just absurd. It doesn't make sense. So I think one of them is you never feel regret, because when you look back, you realize that that's the only way it could have happened. So
yeah, I think it's the
just
difference
drop
between
the assumption.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, just to say that, do I regret? I'm thinking, do I regret? I do sometimes look back and think, oh yeah, I could have done that better than I did,
But it's not true. You cannot. You're just telling yourself a story, effectively.
No, exactly. But it's not now, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that that could have happened in a different way. But at the time, it's not that I think I can go back and alter the reality of it.
But it's not the same, because basically with hindsight, you have more experience and understanding. So basically, with your current knowledge that you have today, you could have done different, but then it would have required a different reality where this knowledge that is now would have been teleported in the past. But with the
Yeah.
knowledge you had at the time, you could only
Yeah.
have done what you did. Now, of course, you can
No,
learn
you're
from this
right.
experience for the next time for something in the future.
Yeah.
So it's still
Sure.
useful to look back and say,
Yeah.
yeah, that was dumb. But it was dumb only based on the information you have now. It was not dumb based on
Right.
the information at the time, or you wouldn't have done it. So that's why
Absolutely.
I'm
No,
saying
you're right.
that you do not feel regret. Now, you may feel that
Ah.
there is a learning experience from there, but it's for
Okay.
next time. But you don't
Yeah.
say, if you don't believe that it's possible that something could have been different, how can you regret? It's just absurd.
No, I mean, apart from acknowledging that it could have been better, with hindsight, of course, it only theoretically, because I know what you're saying is true. You can't actually have done it differently at the time. So it's not like regret. I don't know, maybe you have a negative connotation with the word regret, but I don't actually, because I sort of see that as more like, oh yeah, that could be a positive learning. You know, I did that. I could have, whereas, you know, now I see,
I think
oh,
most
I could
people,
do it like this.
I think most people use the word regret to refer to things that they wish had been different. So I think regret
Okay.
implies a
Right,
wish
maybe they do.
that the
Yeah.
past had been different.
Okay.
I think, yeah, it seems to be the most
Yeah.
common interpretation. So I wish things
Yes.
had been different,
Yeah.
and that's regret.
You're right.
Um,
No, you're actually
but
right.
if
Yeah.
you
No, that's true.
believe, I mean, it's not, sorry, not if you believe, if you realize that things could not have, that the idea that things could have been different is just in your imagination, you
Sure.
cannot really regret. I mean, sure, you can
Well, no,
think
you
about
don't.
an alternative reality, but you, just like you can still think about Santa Claus, but you know it's a
Mm,
story. So you can think about the
mm,
alternate reality, but it's very clear to you that it's just a story of pure imagination. So you don't really regret
mm.
because you don't take it seriously. Basically, you can still think, it would have been nice if I had done that, but you frame it completely in your imagination and you absolutely don't take it seriously.
Yes, I think there is that. You don't suffer the, regret in the way that you were talking about before, where you think, oh, you're beating your brow and saying, oh, I was so dumb,
Because the you at
or
the time thought that this was the
yeah,
best course of action. The you at the
yeah,
time is not the you now, and the you at the time
right.
thought this was perfectly reasonable.
And there's no you there anyway. There was no you.
Well, that I don't know. I
um,
don't want to enter into that story, but I mean, yeah, you of course is also. I mean, well, there was someone that if you had hit it with a hammer on the feet would have felt pain. So to some
for
extent
sure.
there was a you. Now we can debate what the you is and where it starts and where it ends, and of course it's very
Yeah.
complicated. Um,
I don't think it would work to get out of jail, would it? Yes, I committed the crime, but there was no me there. I
yeah,
don't
probably
mean it
not.
in that sense. Not going to stand
Probably,
up, is it?
but I think now there is a theory where in some way people are realizing that at the end of the day, a lot of actions are determined maybe by genetics or by education or
Yeah.
by social status, which, so the idea of fault or blame
Mm.
is I mean, I'm talking about as a society in general and not from Enlightenment perspective. So I think as a society in
Okay.
general, people are starting to realize that the idea of blaming like
Mm.
the individual to say it's the fault of that specific individual is not really true. I mean, sometimes
Mm.
it's mental conditions, sometimes it's genetics,
Right.
sometimes it's education, sometimes it's other issues.
For sure. For sure.
But still, you at the end of the day, the goal of the law is to protect society, and so
Yeah.
people have to go to jail regardless. I mean, basically, they have to go to jail
Yeah.
because they present a danger to society, and
For sure.
at the end, the word guilty or innocent maybe doesn't make any sense, but you still have to protect society from people that
Yeah.
could disturb, let's say, the peace and the unity of society. But it doesn't mean that
Right.
they are bad
No, it
or,
just means,
I mean,
did you do it or did you not do it? I mean, but guilty
yeah,
and innocent are loaded words, aren't they? A bit like purity and,
yes, yes,
yeah,
yes,
sin.
yes. I mean,
Whereas, well, no, I worked in mental health many moons ago, and you could clearly see how particular mental health issues would create certain kinds of behaviors, and it was much clearer in those cases, for example, that they could not help what they were doing, and it was based on how they were.
yeah, strong
you know
compulsion, there is nothing you can do about it.
no.
So I mean, one thing I always thought, like since a very long time, is this idea that if I, whatever I means, but if I was born with the body of that person, with his DNA, with his brain, with his parents, with his education, with his friends, I would have done exactly the same, because of course you are the same, you do the same. So I would have committed the crime, so I would have went to jail. So, but still you need to protect
Yeah.
society. So at the end you end up sentencing them to jail. But there is no real fault. It's like, but you still have to defend yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone
I
tries
get
to
it.
kill you, yeah,
No.
if you were born at his place, you would have also tried to kill that you, but you still
Yeah.
defend yourself. So
Makes sense. Yep. Well, coming up to the hour now. I do have
yes,
to actually go quite soon.
okay,
So,
okay, that's
but
fine.
we
So
could.
I stop the recording now.
Okay.